Okay, today I wanted to talk about Edge of Tomorrow, which has our favorite Scientologist, Mr. Tom Cruise, and let's see, Emily Blunt. And it's actually a story that's based on a light novel, sci-fi light novel, which was actually kind of surprising. I didn't think that those types of movies generally, or movies based on those types of books, really made it into Hollywood. But it seems like I guess it's becoming more common, or at least it seems to be happening more often, shall we say, for I suppose the whole overall anime and Japanese influence on movies and everything. So the story starts off where we're basically watching a bunch of TV ads or TV news reels where basically we are describing, kind of brought up to speed with a alien invasion that takes over the mainland of Europe. So let's see, we got France here, and we got Spain, we got this, we got Italy, we got this, Belgium, Norway, not Norway, that, Germany, and that kind of goes down there, and Denmark is up here with the oven mitten and everything else from there. So the alien invasion happens, and of course we got England up here chilling on the English channel behind the TV. So the alien invasion happens in Germany and basically takes over all of mainland Europe. So basically millions of people are dying, and what the aliens are just called is they're called mimics. They're kind of these amorphous creatures, basically, usually have kind of like, you know, evil eyes with teeth and stuff like this. But as far as their body goes, it's kind of almost like a bunch of coils or wires or something like that, and they can kind of form and reform. They have four legs and claws and everything like that, and tails, but they really kind of morph to whatever shape they need to be. So these are the mimics. And we're getting a bunch of TV ads. Particularly, we notice Mr. Tom Cruise, our fellow, who is a Bill Cage, Cage and Officer Cage, and he's basically going around speaking and talking about how we are winning. We're actually doing pretty good. So it seems like humanity was definitely doing a lot of losing in the initial instance, but now everyone's banded together. They make references to the Chinese and the Russians and everything like that. So everyone's kind of fully united against this alien threat. So they're losing, and then now they're kind of trying to sell or talk about how they're on the back, they're on the front foot now, and they're winning. And they're quoting the recent triumph of this woman named Rita Vertasky. And, let's see, Rita Vertasky. And she has used this kind of new suit function, which is kind of like an exoskeleton, a metal exoskeleton that somebody can put on, and it gives like extra, motorized movement and stuff like this. It has a bunch of extra, like, huge guns for everything. Let's see, it's got this, and you can kind of wield weapons and everything like that. A regular person fits inside of it, basically, and kind of helps amplify their combat abilities. And basically, they're saying that with these new suits, we can now win. And with this, they are getting ready for a giant invasion from England. This is kind of a D-Day. Basically, it's kind of very reminiscent of D-Day, basically a D-Day 2 from here. And it's kind of going over there. And this is the Operation Downfall from there. And so what we've got then is you have this giant, massive land invasion from all the allies. There's going to be something on the Eastern Front. I'm pretty sure that the Chinese and the Russians, I think, are going to help on the Eastern Front and kind of moving in this way. But all the Allied, and at least all the American and British forces and everything like that, are moving in with this one invasion. And there's this gentleman we're introduced who's kind of selling the war, who's kind of, got the slick TV persona, slick TV used car salesman attitude. And that is our character, William Cage. And this is how we're introduced to everything. And then we cut to where Cage goes, and he's meeting a general who's played by that Irish guy, that moody Irish guy. But he's a British general, or Irish, but United Kingdom general, shall we say. And the general says, you're going to the front. basically, and you're going to down there with some TV ads, and it's going to look great. It'll be easy. We're going to put you in a place with, no baddies, basically, and it'll be great. And so Cage, it turns out, is a coward, and this is an interesting thing to do for your main character, because what we start off with very quickly, we understand, is a very, very unlikable character. He's not likable. He's not heroic. He's not Rita Vertasky, who is the hero. They call her the Angel of Verdun because of this one battle that she led them on. And so what it is basically we're met with our main character, who is incredibly cowardly and very unlikable. And it's always interesting when stories do this, where they have a character that's just he's not the hero, he's not the good guy, and he's kind of, you don't really necessarily like the general, because he's incredibly harsh, to some degree, his mannerisms. And you may think that it kind of makes sense to some degree, because I guess he's in charge of saving the world. And so he probably takes that very seriously, because Cage, to some degree, is kind of just like, listen, I'm not a soldier. I'm a marketing guy. Got drafted, my marketing thing. I'm here to sell. I'm here to go on TV. I'm a marketing guy. I'm not a soldier. And the general's just not very impressed. He's not having it at all. He's like, you're going. Cage tries to blackmail him. He says, hey, it would be bad, wouldn't it be a shame if this whole invasion, everything turned out to be your fault? And then seemingly they come to an agreement, and Cage is getting ready to leave, and then he is arrested. Basically, the general tells him to get arrested, and Cage wakes up, and he's in the middle of a military base. So now he's in a military base, and he is sleeping, and he is met by a great actor. I can't remember his name, but he does great, from Science Hill, Kentucky. Which I'd never heard of, which apparently, according to Wikipedia, has a population of 650 people. Which, I don't know how they picked that, but, it's funny. So anyway, so he's picked here, and he's trying to tell the sergeant that, I'm an officer, I'm not supposed to be here, I need to leave, I need to call my CO. And he's told, hey, we're on the eve of a military operation. We are absolutely not going to. And turns out, I have a letter that says you're a liar and a deserter, that you're going to try and do this and you're going to try and ruin all this. So this letter, the general seems to be multiple steps ahead of him, and basically says that whatever you do not let him go. Do not let him make any calls, and he is going to the front, period. And basically, Cage is kind of realizing that, how on earth am I going to get out of this, basically? Because the entire base is on lockdown. Nothing in or out, because they don't want any information to get out about the invasion. Because, again, this is D-Day and D-Day 2, and they're trying to go save humanity from here. And the sergeant is he's a great character, because he's kind of this guy who's, we will redeem ourselves through glorious combat. He has this idea of kind of a religious aspect for it. And he is fully in believing that Cage is a liar and a deserter and a scumbag, and he is going to go to combat, and he's going to help him, and he's going to make sure he does it well. And there you go. And so that's kind of the setting for it. So for Cage, he meets the group. There's this poker game that it turns out the sergeant finds out about, and he makes them eat the poker cards, basically, because he doesn't like gambling. Because, and then he asks them, and they tell him, because it suggests that there's we're trying to take fate into our own hands, as opposed to leaving it up to the good Lord. That kind of idea. So he eats the poker cards, and Cage is like, oh my goodness, I'm trying to get out of here. So what he does is then he ends up in these mech suits, and they're basically heading over in a drop ship. So basically all these people are kind of lined up on these hangar-like things in these drop ships with their mech suits, and they're next to each other. And they're getting ready to fly over, and they're going to drop them, drop them over the landing point, the invasion point for D-Day, basically from there. We'll put our suits up, and then it's like this and like that. And so let's see, this one is Cage. And he's freaking out. He's panicking. He's trying to figure out what's going on. And again, it's interesting so far. Which the nice thing is that everything keeps moving fairly quickly. Because again, we don't like our main character, so this means that we're not going to really care what happens to him. And this is kind of the point A to point B. This is what happens. If you don't like a character, you don't care what happens when they die, which will be interesting. And we'll see how that comes into play very shortly. So Cage comes in, and then basically the dropship gets explodified, and he lands on the ground, and he's trying to go through it, and he sees this, meathead guy get crushed by a plane, so he's dead. And then he's running, and he ducks into, has to jump into a ditch, basically, to avoid getting hit by the same fallen helicopter that hit Meathead. And he's going through this. He doesn't know how to use his gun. His safety's not off. Like, he doesn't know how to do anything. Because, again, he's never trained for this. He's not really a soldier. Nobody would listen to him. Partly his own fault. He's going here. He sees, then it turns out there's a helicopter, and out gets Miss Rita Fertasky. And this lady is, the hero of Verdun, the angel of Verdun, the hero of it. And then she dies. Bam. She gets hit, dead. And he's running through all these different places. Basically, people are getting hit. People are dying all around them. And basically, it becomes very, very clear that the enemy knew they were coming. And this invasion is going to fail. Like, this is not going to work. This is going to fail. Everything is going to completely fall apart. This is not at all going to work. This is not going to work. So he keeps running and hiding, and he's in a foxhole. And then lo and behold, a mimic sneaks up behind him, and he's not able to shoot. He's able to shoot one thing, and then he gets away, but this mimic sneaks up and jumps on him, and then there's an explosion. I think a grenade explodes. It explodes from here, and this mimic happens to be blue, which is kind of interesting. Blue, and then it explodes, and the mimic is bleeding, and it's on top of Cage, and then the blood falls onto him and starts melting him, and he dies. And he wakes up in the same military base the day before. And this is kind of the crux and the main selling point of the movie now, is because we get to the theme of what's going on. Okay, so he wakes up again, and we come very quickly to understand. And basically, if you want to think about this, each section we're going to have the initial section where this is where he wakes up, and this is where he dies. And so basically, we are starting over here. We're kind of headed back to the beginning. So he wakes up. He goes, "Hey, this is Sergeant Farrell from Science Hill, Kentucky." And the sergeant's like, "You're very correct. That's odd." And then he goes back through it, and then he goes, through the military base. The sergeant discovers the poker game. They're forced to eat the cards, basically. And then here they're in the dropship, we'll call it this point, for the dropship. And he's like, "Hey, you guys need to do something, because this is bam, explosion, because it's going to explode." So it gets exploded again. He falls down, and he goes, and then he tries to, he's kind of beginning to understand and trying to figure out what it all is going on. And then bam, he dies again. And then he wakes up. And so what he's realizing is that every time he's dying, he's replaying the day over and over and over again. So as he's beginning to kind of get an understanding of what's going to happen, this is what this person will be here, this explosion, this like this, that. He starts the next time, he goes, "Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and change the course of things." He starts trying to fight. He knows how to use his suit a little bit like that. And he tries to do this. He tries to save Rita, and then the whole thing explodes, and he dies again. And then he tries a new strategy. He's like, "Okay, well, let me try a new one. Let me try one where we'll go and we'll try and tell someone what's going to happen. I can understand. I can see the future. I've lived through tomorrow. Basically, live through tomorrow. He can see, I know what's going to happen. The invasion is going to fail. It's not going to work. Everything is going down. Everything's not going to work." And what they do is they tape his mouth shut. So he is, there's the duct tape. And this is him with his little ears and his Tom Cruise hair. It doesn't quite look like Tom Cruise, but it's pretty close. But basically, here's the tape. So they just tape his mouth shut. And then they're in the drop ship again. And one of the guys is like, I feel like he's trying to say something. And then bam, the ship gets hit again. He wakes up, and basically we get to the point where he goes and he meets Rita Vertasky. And basically he becomes this combat, this combat god, more or less, because what he's doing is he's ducking and dodging, and he goes, hey, you need to come with me. This evasion is a failure. This is not going to happen. Nothing as good is going to happen. At least if I can save Rita, she's the angel of Verdun, and if I can save her, maybe we can win. Maybe this is the way it is. Because again, he's only got 1 day. It doesn't go back 2 days in advance. It only goes back 1 day. And he goes and he meets her, and he's helping her out and trying to keep her alive in order to help win this. And what it is basically he's like, looking over, and he'll start shooting before a mimic arrives, and then he'll kill the mimic, he'll duck, he'll dodge, he'll say, we need to get out of this place. This ship that we're in, this down helicopter, sort of deal basically is going to explode. We need to get out of here basically before this explodifies from here. And then Rita starts seeing him do all this, and she says something very interesting. She says, come meet me, or come find me, I don't remember. Come meet me when you wake up. And he's like, what? What'd this mean? And then bam, the whole ship explodes and they dies. And of course, then he wakes up again. And the day starts over. And so now he's got to figure out what's going to happen. What is the next step from here? And so he goes, okay, so what I need to do is I need to try and sneak away from this camp and go find Rita Vertasky. And basically he goes and he kind of finds, he tries to sneak away, and they catch him. He winds back up on the dropship. Bam, he goes back to the invasion. He starts replaying this whole scene. He wakes up back up in the dropship. The whole poker thing happens. One time he tries to win the people on his side. Goes up and hides the poker game and says, yep, this is it. And helps them out. And then he tries to do this, and then as they're running one day, doing exercises, he just tries to do this. And he tries to, roll under a moving truck and gets splatted. And then he basically has to try again. He wakes up, goes back to the same thing. They're doing the same exercises. And then he rolls in between the tires of a moving truck and he gets it. So this time he doesn't die. He doesn't have to reset. And so it's comedic in a few instances where they're trying to play this off, where he kind of tries to do something, dies, it doesn't work. And then they immediately skip to the part where he's back there again after playing through the whole day, trying again from there. So he's trying that aspect again, and then he comes, and then he shows up, and then he finally meets Rita. He meets Rita, and she's, of course, the super special soldier, so she's kind of on her own, and he goes, you told me later today to come find you. You said, but the same thing that's happened to you has happened to me. And so it's an interesting aspect as we get to this final point and we're trying to figure out, and she goes, okay. And so then she takes him to meet somebody else, and he's like, hey, you need to figure out what happened to me. And she goes, hey, this is, what happened to you is the same thing that happened to me. And he's like, oh, this is awesome. I can get cured, basically, because I don't want to keep living the same day over and over again. And she says, not until you help me, or not until we win. It's this idea of, we still have a job to do. We still need to win. And what he starts describing is that the blue mimics that you found are these special ones. And this is how the creature, basically the Omega, I can't remember what the exact name is, the Omega, basically the hive mind of the mimics, is doing this, where every single time something happens, it's able to activate and reset the day. It can control time. It can go back in time from here and continually just revert, basically, and continue revert. And so anytime it fails, anytime something happens, anytime any one of the blue ones die, it can do it. But you've got its blood over you, which means now the same thing is happening to you. You are replaying the same day over and over again. And every time you die, it just keeps replaying until eventually, theoretically, you succeed. And then you can win, and then this is good for us. But this aspect, so this is kind of the generic, this is more than just the basic plot. This is the intro for it. So this is the stage setup. So now what Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt, Rita and Cage, what they have to do basically is they're trying to find ways. They start training, basically they start training really hard, and they start trying to get him up to speed with everything like that. So then they start doing it, and again, each time they do it, you kind of know the idea that every time he's dying, he's coming back and going through all the basics and everything like that, and then he comes and finds her and explains to her what happens, and then they go on to the next thing. And it's kind of interesting because every time we in the audience understand what's going on, the audience and crews understand, but basically everyone else is kind of like they have amnesia or something like that, because again, the day is going back in time. So he's training, and every time he's training, if he gets injured or anything like that, what to do. There's one point where he gets hit by something and, probably sprains or breaks a leg, basically like that. And Rita just kills him because she knows that the day is going to just redo. It's just going to play over. So it doesn't really matter. He's broken it, but he can keep these experiences going forward. Despite this, he can kind of keep his training. So what they do is they keep training him with the idea that eventually they will continue to succeed. And the reason why I really like this story, the reason why I think it was done really well and really interesting, is because what it does is it changes the dynamic. It changes the dynamic because usually what you're used to is you're used to your main character, or dear main character here, having what we call plot armor. And plot armor is, one of those things where the audience, this is, here's the world, the logic and knowledge within the world. Basically, this is within your fictional world. All of this is inside the world. And from here, what it is it's the audience knowledge. This is where the audience could know something about some technology or something like that the main characters couldn't possibly know, or something like that. And the one thing that the audience knows is this idea of, if the main character dies, the story will suck. It may not necessarily be it suck. It basically will mean, there's no other, good main character idea. This is something that in Game of Thrones people joked about for the North, is that Jon can't die, Jon Snow can't die, because there's no one else in that area that could tell the story. Other people could die because, person A, B, and C, and if B dies, then you still got A and C, that kind of idea. But for this one, this is audience where we know, and we also kind of know to some degree that the main character can't die. It's like when Naruto is facing off against his fights, the whole show is called Naruto. He can't die. And this is where certain ones, Naruto does this a little bit, and Hunter x Hunter does it really well, where basically they take these side characters that you like, and then they put them in a dangerous situation, and these people can die. And this is where you kind of activate it. So this is the Naruto versus Pain fight, where they keep throwing Hinata, or where they throw Hinata out there, and bam. Now it really engages. It takes the story to the next level. You can kind of do this. Hunter x Hunter does this really good with the Antlion arc, with all the other side characters. The whole host of bizarre and odd side characters who are also really good, and they're trying to figure out what happens next to all the characters. And it's done very well. They do it very well. So this is what you understand, though, is you understand that, our main character can't die. And what the idea is, for a lot of cases, what you want to do is you want to sweep the audience up into, the story and action. And what it means is that they will forget they're in a story. And once they forget they're in a story, they will forget this rule of, the main character's probably not going to die. So when the dangerous elements come up or anything like that, it's not something that, breaks them or anything like that. It's not something that drives them, that causes them to continually remember that. They can kind of forget this aspect. But this is just something to keep in mind. So what this story does is, the main character can't die, but the whole thing that flips it on his head is the main character is going to die. We know he's continually going to die. We know it. This is the plot. So what it does is it changes it from, we're worried that the main character might die, to it kind of becomes more of a puzzle. Okay, so basically, how are we going to defeat the mimics? Basically what we're presented with is we're presented with a puzzle challenge where we have one guy who can't die against let's move down here, versus a giant alien army. And this is the fight. So we have one guy who can't die versus a giant alien army. And this is kind of what the story comes about for the next bit. And they keep trying to figure out. And basically what they do is they're playing this game of, bam, dead. Okay? Dead. Bam. And each time he's getting a little bit closer. And each time he keeps doing it. Basically you're presented with when you get here, you throw this grenade over here, you shoot these bullets, you go here, you step here, you duck this, you dodge that, you wait past this, you do this, and each time you do it, and each time you make a wrong step, you die, and then you come back, and then bam. And what it does is it starts to really change the dynamic, because it kind of is interesting, because we're not worried about the main character dying. Again, it's not, most cases that would be a really bad thing when you do it, unless you're trying to do some fun-go-lucky movie or something like that, where it's like they're not really ever in really, really danger. It's kind of just a fun movie because they're not just going to get killed randomly or anything like that. But one, it allows you to kill your main character randomly, but at the same point, he's never going to die. And so what we start to see is we definitely start to like Cruz's character a lot more, because he's trying, he's fighting, he's no longer a coward, and two, he's turning into a super soldier. So this is a really cool effect by byproduct, because he can know what happened, read the future and everything. We start doing it until something very interesting happens. It turns out Cruz ends up getting injured, but he doesn't die. He doesn't die. And they end up giving him, taking him to a hospital. He goes, actually, know what it is, I don't remember. He goes to talk to the general to try and describe to the same general what happened to him, what on earth is going on. And he ends up getting knocked out, and he takes to the hospital, and he ends up getting a blood transfusion. Which, we find out, it turns out that once you get a blood transfusion, it removes your power. Basically, you are no longer going back in time. We're no longer going back in time. And now this is the point that's so bizarre and so cool, is because now we have this insane anxiety that suddenly appears. So basically, whereas before you could run, jump, you could do anything you wanted to, and the consequences were removed, now we've been so used to having no consequences that when they come back, there's this absolute tense anxiety that ends up coming back, because now we could die. It's this sudden realization, we could die. Something could happen to us. And so you have this idea where it's just suddenly you flip the entire story on its head, where before we've created a story where it doesn't matter whether or not our main character could die, until suddenly something happens, it removes all this aspect, and then suddenly we're like, oh no, he could die. And then the story from there becomes incredibly tense, because we know that one mistake could kill you. And the reason why we know that is because we've seen it, because this is the interesting aspect, because in all other stories, you can't have Aragorn killed by a stray arrow, a stray orc arrow. You can't have that. You can have other people get killed, but you can't have Aragorn. In our story, though, in Edge of Tomorrow, you could have it, because Cruz is basically running along, and he gets run over. But it's okay, he's coming back. So he comes back, and then Cruz is running along, and suddenly, explosion. Okay, and then we're running back. Okay, so next one. All right, so Cruz is running along, and da-da-da. And you can have all these quote-unquote random deaths happen to our main character, which never happen. They don't ever happen to the main characters. Our main characters die in, they die in heroic ways. If they do die, but most of the time they live. If they do die, they die in very heroic aspects. It's the showdowns, anything like that, the 1v1s, or anything like that. That's when they will die. But this flips it on its head, because we've seen how fragile people are. We've seen how fragile what it is, because what you're used to is you're used to watching stories where the main character is able to go through this whole thing and they get hit, they get beat up, they get punched, blah, and they just get up and keep going. You know, this is a John Wick where you get punched in the head a whole bunch of times, bullets go off randomly right around you, and you just keep going. And you keep going from there. And this is what it is. But what this does is, now we've seen all this random, we've seen basically how easy it is to die. And now our main character can die. And this is just such a cool effect. This is such a cool aspect that the story does, is because it really takes this idea and flips it on its head. And again, this is something you can do, is where the story is actually fairly generic if you think about it. It's, whoa, 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 what have we got here? We got humans versus the aliens. And we found out we've got a human with special abilities who's now going to fight the aliens. And paired with him is an attractive woman who also is really good at fighting with the aliens. And we're going to go fight the aliens, and then we are going to win, but then they're going to lose. You know, they follow the same traditional, you know, like you're fighting the aliens, you're training, and you win one, which is nice. And so you have this upswing of this, and then you fight again, but then something goes wrong, and then something here, and then something else goes wrong, and then you have the all hope is lost, and then you have despite all the odds, we win. This is how the plot story goes. This is basically how Pacific Rim, you know, this is Pacific Rim from here, you know, where they have the setback, and then they have the all hope is lost. How are we going to do it? But then we do it. You know, this is Independence Day. We have all this aspect where it's humans versus the aliens. You know, you can kind of see how this plays out, and it's not exactly very exciting. It's not very original. But when you have this dynamic, this idea of the main character can die and replay, the entire lens changes. You know, you don't think of this as a normal humans versus alien movie. It really changes. It's that movie where Tom Cruise repeats and everything. It's this one idea, this one component completely changes everything on its head and lets it play out in a completely new way. And you have this awesome dynamic where the main character can't die, but then at some point you become incredibly anxious. And again, when I say, the reason why I say it's cool is tense anxiety is because we are involved and invested in the story, basically. Because if you care what happens to the character, you care about the story and you want to find out what happens next. This is what I talked about, where it's we're starting to like Tom Cruise. You know, he's incredibly unlikable because we're going to kill him a whole bunch. So maybe that turns out, maybe that's really well. We don't want it to have anything tragic. We don't really care about it. But this is the dynamic at play. But yeah, so I think that covers it. I hope you guys enjoy this one, and I will see you in the next one.